wanted to show you a few images I took of Jose's rear axle. I was a little bit concerned about driving across the country to the Nats, not knowing what condition these axles were in. So we opened up the rear axle pumpkin cover there, and I pulled the axles out after removing the C-clips that hold them in, and found out that there was a few issues. But I wanted to show you a couple of these pictures here. The series of numbers on the top here is the part number for this ring gear, and then the 11 colons 37 is the number of teeth on the ring 37 and the number of teeth on the pinion. So if you divided that into 37, you'd come up with the ratio, which is 3.36. This is an extremely common rear axle ratio for our Chevy vans. I believe it's the most common, and it's actually a very desirable ratio for passenger cars, even though it's not readily available. For some reason, 3.36 was very common in our vans, but not in passenger cars. And a lot of these guys that are rebuilding these 10-bolt rear axles would like a 3.36, at least according to the rear axle guy. It makes it real easy if you want to swap it out to another ratio. They'll usually trade you straight across as long as your ring and pinion is in decent order. And then the last one is GM, of course, and then you notice it says 9 of 65. This is confirmation that this is original ring, at least, probably the whole rear axle, I have no doubt. So it's a 66, and this one was made in 9 of 65. So that's a little bit closer shot. I don't know if we need that. Look at that. Now this shows the rear axle surface. Let me see if I get a clear shot of that. Yeah, there we go. Okay, so what you see here is two very distinct patterns of wear. One is here, which is the original bearing surface where the bearings rode on, and here is another one. Now this indicates that they've had these bearing buddies. They go by a bunch of different names, but essentially when the axle is worn and there's not much surface there where you don't feel confident just replacing the bearing, then what they do is they have another bearing type that sits in farther to the axle housing and still rides on this machine surface that goes all the way across. And you can see where this one has been sitting. Those are individual roller bearings. And so this one is just really tore up. It's just in much worse condition than the original surface. Now, the rear axle guys that I've talked to, they would prefer not to install these bearings that sit in deeper. It causes problems with a levering when you're going around turns. It just puts more stress on things, and maybe that's part of the problem. But if you can't afford new rear axle shafts and you've got a tore up bearing surface, it is an option to put in those axle saver type bearings. Now, this is another spot where it shows how tore up it is. This is just in a really bad, it's one of the worst that I've seen. And there's the other side. This is just excessive pitting. I mean, I am so glad that we looked at this and wanted to make an inspection, even though you have to, disassemble part of the rear axle to get these axle shafts out. It's just a real problem if we were going to try to drive across country with those. It would just we'd really be taking a chance, especially if we load that rear axle down heavily. So this is where it's in another spot, I've rotated this. And you can also see the buildup of uh, crud. This is the accumulation of leaking axle fluid and brake dust and stuff like that that ends up getting in there. It hasn't been serviced in a long time. At least it hasn't been cleaned. So this is a pretty bad one, and one more shot. So um, if you have a rear axle and you are not, if you have a rear axle that you don't know what the condition is, or it has not been checked in your memory, it might be worth it to pull out these rear axle shafts just enough to be able to see this condition and determine whether or not you want to take a long trip or plan to have your rear axle overhauled. Now, these rear axle shafts are a custom length compared to the passenger cars. And I believe that would also mean that the axle housing is a custom length. So even though it's a kind of a standard 10-bolt rear axle, these things are unique to the vans. So trying to find a new axle shaft is virtually impossible. You'd have to have them custom made through, well, Moser is a good example, a good place that I've had axle shafts, and they're reasonable for something that's this old, and it's extremely high quality product that they sell. So if you have a brand new Moser axle, then you put new bearings in and you're going to be riding on the original surface. And if you keep your lubrication up, chances are it'll go for quite a long time, 150, 250,000 miles, depending on how much of a load you put on that rear axle. So just wanted to share that. Hope that helps out. And thanks for watching.